Cliches are everywhere. They are encoded into the way that we think and express ourselves in such a pervasive way that we just don't even notice they're there most of the time. When I say the view was breathtaking, or I'm dead tired, or my heart was broken, they just pop up and I don't even think about it.
The thing about cliches is they're really useful. They're a shortcut to meaning and understanding. The problem with cliches is that if we use them without changing anything, they generally sound dull, boring, and lazy. So how do we use these cliches in a way that exploits this preloaded meaning, but stops us cringing when they do pop up in our lyric writing?
In this video, we're going to show you the flip method and guide you through 6 different strategies for flipping cliches into some of the best lyrics you'll ever write. Flip number 1, replacing. With replacing, what we're looking for is a cliched expression or phrase that contains a word or an image that can be easily replaced with something else. The key to this, and where the fireworks really happen in the ear, is that the expression itself should trigger the cliche. So let me give you an example. When I say, "we fight like," your brain naturally fills that in with cats and dogs. So the beginning of that cliched expression, "we fight like," triggers the cliche in the mind of a listener. They fill in the blanks because it is so familiar. So in order to introduce the element of surprise or novelty, we're actually going to swap out cats and dogs with anything but cats and dogs, basically. So if I said something like, "we fight like rust and rain," well, that is new, that is something different, that is something novel. It creates the delight of surprise, but Trojan horsed inside something familiar.
So once we understand how this flip method works, we can start experimenting with all sorts of different word pairings. We fight like tree roots and concrete.
We fight like secrets and loose lips.
We fight like a toupee and a sudden breeze. Oh, I like that one. That one's good.
Any of these is not only more interesting than the original, but it actually has the effect of shining a brighter light on the alternative combination you've come up with, because you have subverted the expectation that's created by starting the phrase in the familiar way, but finishing it in a novel or surprising way. An example of this from a contemporary songwriter is the song Wild by John Legend. So the hook of that song is, "I want to drive you wild, wild, wild." Now that expression, "I'm going to drive you," or "you drive me blank," immediately triggers the word crazy. That's the expression, that's the cliche. You drive me crazy, I drive her crazy. So to replace crazy with wild actually uses the familiarity of that expression, but shines an even brighter light on his hook, which is wild.
Flip number 2, magnify. In Roxy Music's 1975 hit Love is the Drug, we hear the metaphor laid out plain and simple. Love is the drug and I need to score. And this metaphor has been used by many songwriters over the years because it is such an effective metaphor. We've got this comparison between drugs and love that makes perfect sense to us. There's the intoxication, there's the highs and lows, there's the bliss, there's the withdrawals.
There's the addiction.
All of those things. It makes perfect sense, which is why we're drawn to using it as songwriters.
The problem is, it's been done, and kind of done to death.
Yeah. So how do we take this concept, which is a really good concept, a really good comparison, and use it in our writing, but avoid the cliche?
So the flip here about magnifying is taking something that's already familiar and almost like double clicking on it, zooming in on some specific detail that is related to that concept, but using the detail instead of the cliche. So here are a couple of examples.
In Lord's song, Rider in the Dark, she has the line, "I still feel you now and then, slow like pseudoephedrine." And this is such a great example of zooming in where the word drug is not being used in a general sense. We're hearing very specifically the kind of drug. And it draws our attention to this specific drug, and it gets us thinking about all the effects and the nuances of this particular drug. And that in itself is very clever because it helps Lord describe the nature of the relationship, not just making the comparison in a generalized way.
She's also magnified in not just on the specific drug, but also on a really unique linking quality between what she's describing, which is love or thinking about this person, and actually what the connection is to the particular drug. So in this case, it's not just addiction. She's magnifying in on the concept of slow like pseudoephedrine. So it's not just I'm addicted, it's highs and lows. Actually, all those connecting things are also in themselves cliches. And what she's doing is she's showing us a new connection between a familiar combination of ideas.
And it's, again, such a great choice of drugs in this particular context because it's not a glamorous drug like cocaine. She's choosing essentially a cold and flu medication. And so the image of her, trying to recover slowly from this fairly inane thing, using a slow release off the shelf drug, it just paints a beautiful picture about the nature of their relationship.
I do want to say just quickly, if you want to explore some of these methods in more detail, I've created a free ebook that you can download in the link in the show notes that's called The 5 Best Exercises for Writing Better Lyrics. So go and grab it right now. Flip number 3, extending. Extending a cliche is when you take a common or familiar cliched expression, you take it as it is, but you actually extend or elaborate on the expression by introducing new words or images that are actually related to the images inside the cliche. So let me give you an example straight away. If I take a cliched expression like the conversation flowed, I could extend that cliche by taking the word flowed and using some more water imagery. So for example, I could say, as the conversation flowed, I started to drown in the undercurrent of everything I didn't understand.
So in this way, you're really using the cliche as the launch pad for a more interesting line. You're doubling down on the imagery.
I'm doubling down on the imagery. And not only in this case am I doubling down on the water flowing imagery, but I am subverting the expected meaning of the cliche, right? Because usually when you say the conversation flowed, it means the conversation was easy. But here what I'm doing is I'm using the imagery inside the cliche to actually say the conversation wasn't easy. The flowing nature of the conversation is what made me feel like I was drowning. But the magic here happens because there is a connection between the words flowed, drowning, and undercurrent.
And the extension doesn't have to be that long. You could say the conversation flowed like honey. And immediately we're thinking about this conversation that's slow and drawn out and kind of oozing. It just gives you such a great visual for the nature of that conversation.
Let's do another one. So what I'm going to do here is I'm looking up a list of cliches online. You can just Google list of cliches or list of common idioms or common expressions. So I'm looking for one here that has some kind of image in it or word in it that I can extend. All right. Okay. So here I found one that is eat our words. So I think about the word eat, and that's an interesting one because eat has lots of imagery related to it, right? Like there's food and there's chewing and there's spit and there's mouth and there's words, and there's also like you eat when you're hungry, right? So I think about the connection between eating and hungry, and immediately, okay, I can extend that by saying we were hungry enough to eat our words. Which is really interesting, right? Because it has created a completely new meaning out of a familiar expression.
The song Case of You by Joni Mitchell, I think, is a beautiful example of this extension that occurs over the 4 lines of an entire chorus. You're in my blood like holy wine, tastes so bitter and so sweet. And bitter and sweet, that's pretty expected in a way. It's the last 2 lines that are surprising and deliver all the joy and satisfaction for the listener. I could drink a case of you and still be on my feet. And here we see Joni Mitchell extending the initial metaphor to really make her point. And that is, she's so intoxicated with this person. She's so in love with this person. She could drink a case of them and still be standing, which is impractical. You can't drink a case of anything and still be standing. But that's the way she's chosen to express this metaphor. And it works beautifully when those last 2 lines land.
Taylor Swift is also a genius at this. If we look inside the lyric of her song All Too Well, we can find this line: we were a masterpiece until you tore it all up. So describing something as a masterpiece is a really cliched expression, a really cliched way to describe something as like exquisite and wonderful and amazing. But she extends the image by saying it was this thing, but then we tore it all up. And that extension of the cliche recasts the whole thing in a completely new light.
Flip number 4. Inverting. In this flip, you're turning a negative into a positive or a positive into a negative, or essentially taking a cliche and finding its opposite.
This particular flip strategy relies on finding a cliche or an idiom for which this can really work. And it's not going to be every cliche that works like this, but some work really well. So if we take an expression like, the grass is always greener on the other side, we could say the grass is never greener on the other side. So we're literally just stating the opposite of the known cliche.
Rather than replacing one word with its opposite, we can also do this flip in a slightly more subtle way. So if we look up another idiom or another phrase, and let's go with actions speak louder than words. We could flip that and say, actions cower in the shadow of words.
Whoa.
And it's still the same idea. It's still the opposite idea, but we've played with the language a little bit to be a little bit more dramatic and not so straightforward.
You know what? That actually reminds me of another John Legend song that uses that exact cliche and uses our first flip strategy. Okay, so call back to first flip strategy, but actually starting with this phrase, actions speak louder than words. His lyric in his song Actions, the whole hook there is actions speak louder than love songs.
There you go. Nice.
John Legend, what a cool dude. See what I did there? Flip 5 relies on finding a cliche or idiom that has two words or images where you can take them and actually swap their position and create something that still makes sense. So again, it's not going to work for everything that you're going to find, but you need to look for expressions or phrases where there are these two components that can actually swap places and still make sense. So an example of this might be something like the cliche, there's no time like the present. And by swapping time and present, I come up with something like, there's no present like time.
It's amazing how the meaning instantly shifts and you're there thinking about it in
Totally.
a whole new different way. Another idiom might be storm in a teacup. If we flip it around, we get teacup in a storm.
And it creates this really interesting meaning, right? It makes you think about what does that actually mean? Because someone who makes a storm out of a teacup is someone who makes a big deal out of kind of nothing. So someone who can make a teacup in a storm is someone who can take a chaotic experience and make it really manageable, something like that, right? So it's completely different. It creates a new meaning, but it creates it out of something familiar, which gives us the comfort of familiarity with the delight of surprise.
It also gives you this added benefit of taking you into some new territory for idea generation. So I suddenly started thinking about people on the Titanic as they were going down, the ones who were there sipping their tea in very expensive suits, and what kind of scene that must have looked like, It will take you places that you didn't expect. So from an idea generation point of view, it's really fun. Flip 6, pairing. Flip 6 is a little different to the previous strategies because rather than just thinking of cliches as famous phrases that we all know, we're going to look at cliches as really predictable or common ways of pairing words.
For example, pairing hot with cold, night with day, up with down, soft with hard.
Which makes perfect sense that we have those pairings because we learn pairings that way as children.
And predictable pairings are not just about pairings of images. Predictable pairings also come as rhymes, right? So predictable rhyme pairs, pain, rain, love, above, fire and desire. Don't do it.
No more.
So we're going to show you an exercise in how to create new and surprising pairings, some of which are going to take the predictable aspect, right? Like using a word like hot, which immediately conjures related words that we've heard because of the frequency of usage, but we're going to replace the frequent pairing with something completely new and original. So here's how the exercise works. If I give you an expression like, if you are a bird, then I am the... and leave that blank. Your challenge is to fill in the blank in 10 different ways. Now, we totally anticipate that the first 3 or 4 that you come up with are going to be cliches, and you should absolutely embrace that. In fact, you want to embrace that. You want to get out the predictable things to actually get to the underlayers of more interesting pairings. So the predictable things might be like, if you are a bird, then I am the...
wind.
If you are a bird, then I am the...
clouds.
Right. But more interesting things might be something like, if you are a bird, then I am the rifle.
Which, of course, is from a Laurie McKenna song called The Bird and the Rifle.
Which is an incredible song, and you should absolutely go and listen to it.
We are always on the hunt for songs and compositions that use these techniques that we're talking about.
So if any come to mind for you, please let us know in the comments and share them with everyone. If you're interested in more ideas, tools, techniques, and inspiration for your lyric writing, make sure to check out this playlist that we have made just for you. Happy writing, guys.